To explore this for a moment in terms of what it means for the future of the West, it seems that this breaking down of any core consensus on values and how we might treat one another, how we might respect one another, is playing out particularly badly for young people. They've, if you like, had very poor models of interaction and civility modelled by baby boomers.
Yes.
Their capacity to take that forward is turbocharged by social media and the anonymity of the keyboard. And so you see them now, and I'm not blaming young people for this so much as saying that I think it's a tragedy, who are now capable, it's almost as though we've rediscovered burning at the stake. People can be so ostracised, so cut off, almost cancelled, declared persona non grata. And as we've seen in Australia, it can result in terrible tragedy, literally in kids saying, well, I just don't want to live anymore.
Yes, but cruelty never goes away. It's only ever restrained. It's always present in us, in the kindest of us. I think there's cruelty, and once the opportunity to express it and get away with it is there, then a lot of people will take it, and some will be victims of that. And it's true, it's not the fault of this generation. They have been, to some extent, abandoned. There was a great line in Leonard Cohen's song, Stories of the Street, back in 1967, which haunted me when I first heard it at the time. Where do all these highways go now that we are free? We were free without the equipment to cope with our freedom. And as parents, as educators, as people as givers of examples, my generation must be one of the worst and most reprehensible in human history.
So you raise a very interesting concept there, that it seems to me that we've turned freedom into licentiousness.
Well, freedom is licentiousness.
Faced with where it takes us.
Freedom is licentiousness if you don't have a very strong moral structure. It will inevitably be so.
So we give up the moral structures and then we regulate ourselves to death. We outsource our consciences to regulation, to law.
Yes.
Free speech is one of the areas in Australia now where we're trying to define it, because the graciousness to accept that others have a right to put a point of view is largely washed out of the system. Now everybody wants it defined narrowly and legally. And the problem with that is it opens up the way for lawfare rather than mutual cooperation and respect.
Sure. I think it's about right.
It's a worry.
Well, it's more than a worry. It's the end. I'm amazed at the speed with which free speech is dying, but even more amazed the almost total indifference of so many people to it, and the willingness of people who imagine themselves to be civilized and liberal-minded to go along with schemes which will close down the freedom of speech. And people applaud. I was having an argument on the internet the other day with an academic who was applauding measures to restrict what people can say on Twitter. Well, and people say dreadful things on Twitter, but do we really want to make the price of that a set of regulations which mean people can be arbitrarily silenced by some anonymous, unaccountable committee of who knows, sitting in some room in California? I don't think that's wise.
Now, last year you told me very frankly, and the point was well taken, that you weren't going to offer me some fool's hope on a way forward. And yet, I know that this conversation will be heard by quite a lot of young Australians who are idealistic and want to make a difference. To take you back to that, can we just, I love that period of English history about the time when Australia was being settled. Britain was a pretty ugly place, deeply divided, pretty crassly immoral. I mean, for heaven's sake, the king's sons were racking up unbelievable gambling debts and the taxpayer was paying them off. It was gin-soaked, it was class divided, freedom of speech was pretty lacking at that time. It was pretty ugly. But there were a bunch of reformers known as, the Clapham set, William Wilberforce and the Thorntons and a whole bunch of others, who set out to make a difference, and Britain changed massively. Is the day for that sort of hope gone? What do we say to young people who say, I actually want to continue to live in a free country, I see the dangers, I want to do something about it?
Well, there'd also been the re-evangelization of the country by Wesley and several other very powerful and effective preachers which had preceded that, and the Victorians reaped the benefit of Wesley, and we in the early and middle part of the 20th century took the benefit of the Victorians. But there is a direction of travel in the events you described. There were people who seriously wanted to re-evangelize and re-Christianize the country. From Sunday schools to whatever you have, and they successfully did it. And as a result, for instance, crime rates in this country were falling precipitously towards the end of the 19th century, and the levels of crime and disorder and the levels were extraordinarily low, the levels of civility extraordinarily high, right through the terrible economic crises which ran from the general strike through the 1931 collapse of the government, and in which in other countries led to terrible convulsions, did not do so here. But that there had been a direction of travel, there had been an attempt to re-evangelize the country. I do not see anything remotely resembling that. Now look, when I say I see no hope in temporal things, that's what I'm saying. I see no hope in temporal things. I would be delighted to be wrong. If anybody can come up with any serious evidence that I'm wrong, I would be the first to be pleased. But nobody ever does. And I shan't live forever. After I've died, things may happen which I couldn't possibly foresee and haven't foreseen. So I could then be shown to be wrong. Well, that's a problem for me, but it's not a problem for anybody else. I could be wrong. But if you want to say that I'm wrong, then you have to come up with some evidence that anything equivalent, for instance, to John and Charles Wesley is in being in Britain or anywhere else at the moment. I can't find anything.
I can understand your concern very deeply, and I think a lot of people do. Nonetheless, it's always invigorating and wonderful when noble people want to have a go. And so,
well, I have no doubt that it is, but on the other, but also it's disastrous when people lead people off on children's crusades where they all get slaughtered by overpowering forces which were bound to slaughter them, and the people who lead them off in false hope have a very heavy responsibility on their shoulders if they do so.
Mm. Let me drill in. You just used.
Also, I would add, this thing about striking blows and all the rest of it. I believe that I have over several years. I'm a one-man think tank. I've examined so many of the crises of our society. I've done an awful lot of research on it. I've established to my own satisfaction, and have never been contradicted by my opponents in terms of the research that I've done, so many problems which I've delineated and come up with answers to. And I might as well have spent the whole time on the beach or in the pub. Nothing that I have said has ever made the slightest difference. There is no point of connection between anything that I've said or done and the political system. I cannot make any impact whatsoever. I might as well not have bothered. And so it's hard for me to say to other people, you go off and do this time-wasting thing. You go off, waste your time doing the work, doing the research, finding out what's wrong, coming up with the answers to it, and then being told that nobody wants to listen to you. You can't get airtime. The political parties have absolutely no interest in even hearing what you say, and hearing people. And this I repeatedly find, particularly over the drugs controversy, hearing people after I have spoken in the same room as them continue to say things which I have established to be untrue, as if they hadn't even heard what I said. And you have to go through that to understand just how devastating it is to any kind of belief that any action that you might take will have any effect. We all know the biblical injunction, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. Well, I believe I've done that, and the result of it in material temporal terms has been zero or less than zero over many years. Well, I draw a lesson from that.
I'm going to
the temporal stuff is just a waste of time.
I'm going to very, very, very gently and very politely say to you, please don't give up. The conversation we recorded.
I have given up. I don't anymore entertain the slightest hope that the things that I do will result in any good outcome.
I had a young Australian call me after listening to our last conversation, to say that it had what you had to say had massively impacted on him personally. So there's one young Australian out there who's deeply appreciative of the things that you say.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you value vital conversations like this one, please like, share, subscribe, and join the conversation.